Welcome everybody to another awesome episode of Rock Talk with the DocRocker. I am with the DocRocker himself, Denton Orlotto, and today, Denton, we have a guest in our Zoomiverse, and we're also continuing a topic that we started a few weeks ago. What are we talking about today?
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome the host of our other Teacher Talk show that's currently on Pansy Podcast right now. This is Russ Downey, drum instructor, public school music teacher, certified K-12 educator, really well-versed in lots of different instruments, lots of different styles, prog rock enthusiast. We are going to revisit prog rock because I feel like the episode we did on that, we just barely scratched the surface. You know, we had about a half hour to 40 minutes worth, and we kind of touched on like 30 different bands. And then next thing we know, it was like, well, we're done. So we figured let's revisit it. We'll bring in somebody else who's got a different perspective, and we're going to just kind of gush about a lot of our favorite prog rock acts that are currently out or were out or, you know, whatever. So here we are. So Russ, welcome. You know, this is the episode where hosts collide. You know, those of you that have been following maybe both channels, we have Jeff here who hosts the Rock Talk episodes every week, and we have Russell who hosts the Teacher Talk episodes, both of which are drummers, both of which are hardcore rock enthusiasts. And I feel like we're going to have a lot of fun tonight talking about some of these different bands and different styles of prog rock and all of the subgenres that lie therein. So, Russ, where would you like to start? You know, what's the first band that comes to mind when the word prog rock gets brought up in a conversation?
Oh, God. Yes.
Yeah, I'm surprised. I was not expecting that answer from you, honestly. I was looking at that poster behind you there.
I know exactly what you were expecting me to say, but I'm saving that one because I know what band you were thinking I was going to talk about. I'll talk about them soon enough. I've got a bit of a different classification for them. But the first band
going to be really interesting.
Yeah, the first band I think of when I think of like true progressive rock that defines a genre is Yes. And it's just because you're talking about a band full of 5 members who are virtuosic performers who write music that has the density to rival, you know, Baroque or classical era music in a rock setting. And it's truly what defines the genre to me. And when somebody says, you know, can you recommend a prog rock band to listen, like, go listen to Yes. So that's usually where I start.
Okay.
I know myself personally, I had a chance to hear them when I was pretty young, probably about 11 or 12, and probably earlier, but I can't remember much earlier than that. And their stuff was always very interesting to listen to. It was a totally different world than a lot of the standard rock music I'd heard when I was younger as a kid. And it was always just kind of amazing to me to like hear musicians at that level, especially considering those musicians also wound up inspiring a ton of other musicians who wound up defining the genre later on down the line. So to see where the tree branches kind of go to is amazing, especially from that one group alone.
Yeah, very cool.
I agree. You know, when you talk about Yes, when you talk about prog rock, the first one to come up should be Yes, or it should be Rush, or it should be Kansas. It should be probably one of those 3. As far as like the mainstream prog rock goes, I think. Now you were saying like you got into Yes when you were young. I got into Yes when I was young too, but I'm a little bit older. So the first time I heard Yes was Owner of a Lonely Heart, because it was a huge thing on MTV. And I was like, this is a really cool band, man, but I wouldn't call them prog if it's you just hearing that song. So I went, you know, just because, Danton's mom and our other cousins are a lot older than me. Like I went and I was able to explore that a lot easier when I was a kid. All I would have to do is ask Danton's mom or our cousin Ernie about these 70s rock bands, and that was it. And then I was off. And so then I got to hear like All Good People, and I got to hear Starship Troopers, and I got to hear, they're the 2 songs that come to mind because I love those songs. And then it's like, oh wow, Yes is not Owner of a Lonely Heart. Yes is these other songs, you know, these huge epic songs. And that's when I really started to enjoy Yes for what they were, a prog rock band. And one more thing I always have to mention when I talk about Yes is John Anderson's vocal. No one sings like that. Fantastic musicians and just unparalleled, really. And they've been around for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
And
still around now, right?
Yeah,
essentially, although it's been different since Chris Squire passed away a few years back.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I forgot that happened pretty recently.
And they were touring as two different bands. It was like John Anderson's Yes, and then it was another Yes or something like that.
Yeah, there was kind of like a falling out, but the history of Yes is literally a history of lineup changes. However, the funny part is that like it's funny you should mention hearing like Yes the first time with Owner of a Lonely Heart. My first instance of Yes that I heard was probably the rarest one, which was the one after John Anderson and Rick Wakeman left in the late 70s, and Jeff Downs and I can't remember his name, the other guy from the Buggles, Trevor Horn joined the band for the drama album. Yeah, for the drama album. And I probably got a chance to hear the heaviest version of Yes you will ever hear in existence. And it's a fantastic album, the drama album with like Machine Messiah and Into the Lens. There are some really interesting pieces that are a very, very like odd end of the Yes library, because it almost feels like a totally different band. If it wasn't for the fact that it was Chris Squire and Steve Howe and Alan White in that band, you'd think it was another group. And it was really interesting because for a while I'm like, oh, this must be what Yes is like. And then when I was a little bit older,
you check out the rest of their stuff and you find a world of difference, right?
Basically, yeah. And the first thing I heard, like when I first heard Roundabout, I'm like, after having the drama album to listen to, my first instance of the older stuff was actually like not like a greatest hits, but sort of. It was called Classic Yes, which had like some live recordings and some other ones as well. So one of the first recordings I heard of like Roundabout was a live recording from the late 70s where it was Alan White instead of Bill Bruford as the drummer. And it was like, it was a heavy duty piece of music for hearing them play live. And it was really kind of had a lot of force behind it. And the oddest part is I found myself almost slightly disappointed the first time I heard the studio version of it, because it didn't have as much punch behind it. Oddly enough, the reputation I'd heard about Yes is that in the 70s, they had some of the loudest shows you ever would have been to. They also did like a theater in the round style type of thing with the show where they had like the stage in the center of the arena, which was an interesting concept. But just hearing that stuff earlier on, and I kind of worked my way backwards, I wound up finding out that like I really did like some of the early 70s stuff as well, but it is a totally different take versus what drama was, versus what the late 70s stuff was, versus the 80s stuff, which is really Yes in anything but name, essentially. Although I give them credit for trying to adapt, because the vast majority of the other prog bands either had to adapt or were dead by the end of the 70s.
Right, and they did. Most of those prog bands did adapt in the MTV era, we'll say. Like, look at Genesis, for instance.
And I can't wait to talk about them, because, like, Danton knows I'm a huge Genesis fan, but it didn't.
Yeah, Genesis is another hot topic. Yeah, absolutely.
Like, that
where
didn't
you
happen
compare decade to decade. It's like a different band entirely. And I can say the same thing about Kansas too.
Yeah, and it's taking a listen to like early Genesis. Early Genesis, one of the reasons I don't call them like the quintessential prog band is because they have a much more peculiar style to them. In that, like, you could listen to one Genesis album, like you could listen to Foxtrot and say, okay, well, that sounds vastly different than Selling England by the Pound, which sounds extremely different from Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. And then Peter Gabriel leaves and they transform into a totally different band with a more instrumental focus, where like Steve Hackett takes the forefront as the guitarist for the next two albums, of which like Wind and Wuthering, which is the last one he was on, is still one of my favorite albums of theirs to this day. And not to denigrate the stuff from the 80s, it's just that, again, you either adapted or you went out of existence. And Genesis adapted, and Yes both adapted in totally different ways, mind you, with Genesis having more staying power, obviously. But it's just, it's interesting because I find myself starting with the more popular stuff and working backwards, rather than like those who started with the earlier stuff and went forwards and found themselves losing interest in it.
Yeah, that was exactly what happened with me in Kansas, but we could get there later on. But for me, like, of course, my first exposure to it, I don't know if we talked about this a lot on the original episode or in an earlier episode of whatever, but like for me, like, honestly, the first exposure to that band was through Carry On Wayward Son being a featured song on Guitar Hero.
Nice.
At that point, I was like 14, 15, and it was like, oh, it's borderline prog, you know, it's like a really like just solid classic rock song from like the 70s. And I'm like, oh, these guys sound awesome. And the vocals are great. And there's a cool little organ thing. And the guitar riffs are great. And, you know, everything about it was really interesting. And I remember just bringing it up to my piano teacher at the time, Matt Magasco, who was a huge Kansas fan. And then he basically sat me down in a lesson and was like, sit down and get ready, because Carry On Wayward Son is the tip of the iceberg. And he showed me all their stuff from the 70s. And for me, like kind of exploring the band further on my own, then I explored the 80s stuff and finding that they kind of adapted their sound as well, not only because of what was popular at the time, but also in lieu of lineup changes as well. You know, they had, you know, their main writer, Kerry Livgren, left because he started doing a lot more solo project stuff, and there's a whole other couple of reasons why he left. And then they ended up bringing in a different singer, John Elefante, who was their front man for most of the 80s, I'm pretty sure. I'm a little fuzzy on the 80s stuff. It's not really the thing I know best, because at that point I was kind of losing interest. Like, the stuff in the 70s is so much more colorful and interesting and kind of off the wall and like really unique and interesting and different. Not that the 80s stuff isn't. It's like solid rock music, and it's great, and there are a number of songs that I really enjoy from that era. But then kind of seeing what happened in the decades that followed was really, really interesting for me. And it's kind of interesting that we talk, like we're kind of circling around, yes, Genesis, Kansas, and Rush, kind of these ideas that all these like big prog bands from the 70s had a major turning point into the MTV era, and like they all made major stylistic changes, but each of them kind of made changes in their own way that I think is kind of interesting, and that could be a lot of fun for us to unpack and talk about. And, you know, even if we just talk about what we like, what we don't, whatever. So,
well, I mean, it's funny you bring up Kansas. Like I've told you before, they were one of the bands at my first concert that I went to when I was like 8 years old.
Yeah, them and Styx, right?
Yeah, it was Kansas and Styx was my first concert.
Oh, I would have loved that for a first show. My first show was a major letdown by comparison.
It was an interesting show. I didn't know much about Kansas before I went to it, and I was only 8, so I really didn't latch on to much. I was more there to see Styx than anything else. But it's funny you bring up that too, because I would actually argue that Styx, prior to like the late 70s and early 80s, definitely kind of belonged in that category too, especially their earlier stuff prior to Tommy Shaw joining the band in like 1975 or 76, whenever it was. Prior to the Crystal Ball album. But the thing is that it brings up an interesting concept, and this is one of the reasons I don't always call Rush like quintessential prog, is because I kind of group them like North American prog, which is basically like heavy rock with prog sensibilities.
A lot different than the British stuff, for sure.
Very much so, like extremely different. Like you could listen to like a Genesis album or a Yes album and then listen to Rush or Kansas and Styx, and you're like, these are totally different concepts.
Yeah,
they kind of start from the same principle. Like you see bands like Rush taking inspiration from Yes and Genesis, but it's like listening to somebody combine The Who, Led Zeppelin, Genesis, and Yes all into one album. And
they definitely did their own thing with it, which for me that kind of ties into like my hot take with them, because I, you know, whenever I like meet somebody and I mention like, oh, I'm into like progressive rock music, you know, I'm a big Kansas fan, and like it always kind of happens that someone mentions like, oh, if you're into prog, you gotta like Rush, like they're like this big crazy awesome prog band. And for me, like a big part of what disappointed me about that band, you know, anyone who knows me knows I'm not really a big Rush fan, which I know is a little bit controversial, but you know, for me, like kind of going into a lot of Rush's stuff, like I remember, you know, Russ and I would talk about that band a lot when we worked together at our old teaching job, and it was like, all right, I should give these guys. So I sat Russ down one night and was like, give me like your definitive Rush albums, like which ones should I listen to in their entirety if I want to really get into this band, because I want to give them a fair shot. And most of Russ's answers were like pretty much from their 80s discography. So like Moving Pictures.
Late 70s. Let me reiterate. I gave him like my top 3 albums plus another few. My like main era for Rush is basically like Farewell to King's Hemispheres to about Power Windows. Power Windows is kind of like a guilty pleasure of sorts, because it's a very odd album to kind of peg down exactly what it is, but it was one of the first ones I ever listened to when I was younger. Honestly, out of like all the best prog albums they have, probably Hemispheres probably is the best one in my opinion. I know everybody loves 2112, but Hemispheres is a much better album from start to finish, especially with Villa Strangiato. Hemispheres itself is great, and I love that album, but it's one of those ones where you have to work your way back to it. You can't just listen to that necessarily and start and get the main idea of it. Permanent Waves was one of the first ones I think I mentioned to you.
Yeah, that one I listened to as well. And I remember going through a lot of these kind of like with the expectation that it's going to be like really like off the wall goofy stuff, because I was going in expecting something that sounded a lot like Kansas, something that sounded a lot like a lot of the later Dream Theater stuff, which I know Dream Theater is a whole different time period. It wasn't even close, and for me that was a big part, because like I had this like really high expectation, because years and years of so many people telling me as a prog rock enthusiast that I would enjoy Rush for it being prog. It really didn't come off as prog to me, and that was a really interesting conversation that Russ and I had after the fact, where I listened to it and, you know, like, hey, I listened to a lot of this stuff. I'm not really getting it. Like, I don't really understand why people really kind of tie these in like with all those prog acts, because sonically it's very, very different. and it's definitely it's great music, you know, like no one can argue that or deny that. But for me, like comparing it to like the wacky like mixed meter kind of stuff, the great you really major changes of form and changes of key and like weird instrumentations, like none of that stuff was present in any of the Rush albums I went through. And if it ever was, it was more of an exception. It was like one or two songs on an album here or there like that really caught my attention and got my interest, really interested, you know. But aside from that, it was like, all right, it's just like solid, more like Zeppelin-esque rock music, like this really cool like hard rock, like 80s hard rock kind of stuff, and it's awesome, but it just wasn't for me.
I'll give some examples, but I feel like, Jeff, I feel like you're like bursting at the seams to say something.
Well, okay. First off, you're describing Rush, and you're saying Rush, and then you're saying Kansas, or Rush and Dream Theater, we'll say. How about that? It's like you saying I like Black Sabbath, and then I'll give you Megadeth, Rust in Peace to listen to, and say they're both heavy metal. It's not the same. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like
it's nowhere close. They're both great in their own ways, but you comparing those is really comparing an apple to an orange, and that's always what kind of bothered me about like how Rush gets lumped into being a prog rock band, because. And I think that was the general consensus that Russ and I came to. Like, they're not really prog; they're more
heavy rock with prog.
Mildly progressive heavy rock.
The best
which is awesome. There's nothing wrong with that. It's great.
The best I can explain it. I think one of the reasons why Rush gets lumped in as prog rock is because they don't really fit a category very well.
Yeah,
they are probably like they're probably one of the bands that you can't really peg down as part of a movement, because out of more than any other band I've ever seen, they've existed on the outside for so long that they literally, once 2112 happened, like, all right, I'm going to tell a story, of course. Why, hello there.
Hi.
So here's the story. Basically, what it was that within their first 3 albums, basically the first one before Neil Peart joined the band, and then Fly By Night and Caress of Steel, their record company basically said, you got to like turn out a single for us to promote. Otherwise, like
that's a real bummer.
Yeah, it's not going to sell. So they basically figured they're going to lose their record deal anyway. So they made 2112. It turned out a single. It just happened to be 21 minutes long. And the thing is that because it wound up being so popular from them constantly touring and like word of mouth support, and basically kind of like an old school version of what like internet forums were for like, you know, talking about music probably back in the 90s and the early 2000s, is that 2112 basically gained popularity outside of the pop music scene, basically. And because that happened, Rush basically became what they referred to, and kind of how I figured them as well, kind of like the biggest cult band on the planet, essentially, where they existed outside of the mainstream. They would have mainstream hits, like on the next album on Farewell to Kings, they had Closer to the Heart, like the one that gets lumped in with, you know, Free Will, Spirit of Radio, and Tom Sawyer, and Limelight. Every time somebody says, "Oh, I like listening to Rush," but
it's kind of one of those tip of the iceberg things, though, right? Where like those songs are just so vastly different from like a lot of what the main fans are super into, and that I feel like that's kind of a thing that makes it really understandable why they get lumped into that prog vein, is because that same story is true for a lot of the other bands we've touched on. You know, it's true about Kansas, because I mean, how many people that love Kansas love them for Dust in the Wind, which is literally like at the time the only acoustic song they ever did ever, and it almost never happened, and that's a whole different topic that we could talk about later. But like same thing with Yes, same thing with Genesis, right? There's like a couple of these like surface level songs that kind of like bled their way into the mainstream, but really pale in comparison to all of the other stuff that they are capable of doing. And I've always found that really interesting.
And the weird part, though, is that with Rush, when you take a listen to them, they do contain some of like the mixed meter stuff, but probably more than any band I've ever seen, they do a really, really fantastic job of driving a straight line through all those changes.
Yes, I agree. And a lot of this, the prog element comes from Neil, from the drummer.
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
a lot of it's the actual like the subject matter, what's being talked about. Probably more than any other band, there are songs that are philosophical in nature than any other group you'd ever see. Philosophical or literature. Like, okay, good example. On the Farewell to Kings album, Closer to the Heart, a 3.5-minute long song is on there. Right next to Xanadu, it's an 11-minute long song based off of a poem about Kublai Khan's, like, you know, mythical Xanadu with like the golden domes and whatnot from a poem.
Night and day.
And the thing is that, like, you take a listen to it though, and that is when somebody says like, okay, I want to take a listen to Rush like Prog, I'd send them the video of them playing Xanadu from the Moving Pictures tour, because in my opinion, it's probably one of the greatest moments of musicianship I've ever seen in their entire existence. You have everything from both Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson both playing double neck guitars or double neck guitar and bass, especially a Rickenbacker double neck guitar and bass, which I would love to have. In addition, playing keyboard melodies with his feet and singing at the same time, which is insane. It's and you know, like, you take a look at the talent they were putting out. The talent is up there with some of the top prog bands you could see. But one of the reasons they get lumped in half the time is because most other prog bands out there had 5 members typically, if not
or 6, or 7 sometimes.
Yeah, they were 3 and sounded like a full band.
Yeah.
That was the impressive part of it.
Yeah, and you can't discount the talent in them that they have, of course, to make them sound, those 3 guys sound like 5, 6 guys, like you said. You know, Geddy Lee singing and he's playing bass, he's playing stuff with his feet. I mean, Neil, I love Neil Peart. God rest his soul. He was a fantastic not only drummer, but he was an artist. He was a lyricist. He was a writer.
Yeah.
He took
he
that
wrote
whole,
most of the lyrics.
He wrote
stuff,
all
right?
the
All
lyrics,
of them.
like after the first time he came in.
See, I didn't know that.
Well, the thing is, he was. He basically, the way he talked about it, when they were on tour, he would have books constantly. He read constantly. I mean, there's literally a song on Fly By Night called like Rivendell, which is like ripped straight from Lord of the Rings, basically.
Yeah.
Interesting.
But you know, the thing is that he read constantly, and you can see it in like the songs, in the lyrics. Nobody else writes lyrics like that. I mean, you take a look at like Yes's lyrics, and you know, I love John Anderson's his voice, his vocals, the way he sings, but half the lyrics don't make any sense half the time. At least not in a concrete sense. They're more of a vignette style when you take a look at the way he writes lyrics. But you look at some of the lyrics from Rush's songs, and oddly enough, the music is what most people usually tend to pay attention to first, but the lyrics offer something extremely rare in rock music, and that's a philosophical element, which is amazing to me. I mean, you have like The Spirit of Radio basically having a line like, "One likes to believe in the freedom of music," which is crazy considering you're talking about like the idea of one would like to believe that music is free of influences from, you know, from music companies, or that it's without any outside influence, meaning to basically corrupt it. But, you know, unfortunately, the money that goes along with the glittering prizes and endless compromises shatter the illusion of integrity, which is an amazing line that you won't find in other places. And it's the best way I can put it. I'll take it straight from Jack Black's mouth from the documentary. They offered something that was in short supply in rock music. So, yeah.
Definitely explains their cult following. And I
Absolutely.
can easily understand how fans would latch on to something like that.
100%. What Russ said, you nailed it. Because Rush was something, back when I was in high school, all the drummers wanted to be Neil. I really didn't. But I respected it, and I loved Rush for what they wore. I was more like a Black Sabbath guy, a Megadeth guy. I was more into the metal. But when I read the lyrics for Rush songs, I'm like, wow, man, this is something pretty damn deep. Yeah. And I respected Neil more for that than anything. I mean, yeah, we're not going to argue that he was a fantastic drummer, one of the best that ever lived. But on top of that,
inspired so many. I mean, even
and he
going
shattered
to
the
Dream
whole.
Theater, Mike Portnoy mentions Neil Peart as one of his biggest influences.
Neil Peart shattered that whole stereotype of drummers being stupid.
Yeah,
oh, absolutely.
And drummers not being musicians. Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah,
which is awesome. That's a feat, because it's such a popular trend and trope. You know, this is something we just talked about in our last talk episode about, you know, because it was very drum lesson centralized with our topic, and that was kind of at least one of my hot takes is like, you know, so many other musicians kind of have this superiority complex with drummers. They're like, oh, you know, they're stupid, they're not really musicians. You know, how many times you see the signs? Musicians parking only, drummers park in the rear. Like, it's just so easy to poop on drummers for not being musicians, but they really are. And I think Neil Peart is a great testament to that notion that drummers really can be musicians, if not more than just the driving aspect of the band, literally the creative mastermind behind a lot of the band's output. You know, and that's where I like to connect Rush with Dream Theater, because the same story is true for Mike Portnoy for all the years that he was with Dream Theater. Sure. You know, and that's
there's a lot
we can
of
get to Dream
bands.
Theater later, but you know, I'll save that for later.
There's a lot of bands that are run by the drummer. Okay.
Yeah.
That's my brother.
Ostrachat being one of them, right?
You're absolutely right. I mean, all of them really were a really an independent force of their own, more than I've seen in other bands. Like a lot of times you'll have like bands where, like let's say with Genesis, post after Steve Hackett left, Tony Banks, the keyboardist, was like the driving writing influence of that band. And you can hear, I love his keyboard style, his writing style. But for Rush, they were all in different directions. I mean, without any one of them, you can't replace them with somebody else and expect the same results.
Agreed.
For Neil, with his drumming, the drumming was metronomically accurate to a fault. And it's what the band needed. And probably more so than other bands, if you take a listen to the drumming, those drum fills fit the melodic way their music works more than any other band I've ever heard. Like the drum fills, you hear them with the actual melody of the music, which is amazing to me. I wish more drummers did that. But, you know, for Geddy Lee, the way he played, the way he sang, you know, you watch him kind of come from that bass player school of like John Entwistle from The Who, and it just has this like thunderous kind of sound to it. It also helped he played a Rickenbacker, which is always helpful. But even when he played his Fender Jazz bass later on, like that kind of thundering bass style and the way he played and sang, it was very, very influential. It was very heavy duty. And I think probably the one member of the band that goes unsung most of the time is Alex Lessing, the guitarist, because his style changed drastically over the entire career. As a matter of fact, probably one of the driving influences of all the major changes through Rush, because there's like 70s Rush, 80s Rush, and then there's 90s and 2000s Rush. There's three, like, if you're tired of listening to 70s Rush, okay, I'll go listen to Counterparts from like 93, and it's a totally different band.
Yeah,
and
great album though. Yeah.
One of the parts I love about it is that like in the 70s, it was a very classic rock style guitar playing, minus the virtuosic parts, obviously, that he had into things like
that first, what is it, a self-titled album that came out like late 70s? And
74.
Yeah, that was
that's earlier than I thought. So that to me, like, that's my favorite Rush album that I've ever heard, because it literally just sounds like Led Zeppelin with a little bit more of a
twist. It does.
Yeah,
it does.
And I think
that's the only one with a different drummer.
Yeah,
that was the only one with
that's
John
not Neil Peart?
No,
I did not know that.
We talked about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
He's on the second album.
I can't remember all this stuff, man.
He's gonna fly by night.
They have one lineup.
I'm used to bands that have had a dozen, you know,
I know.
Talking about Maiden, talking about Kansas, even talking about Dream Theater. There's a number of lineup changes there. Even in all the years that Portnoy was their drummer, they had like 3 different keyboard players before they got to Jordan Rudess finally. And then after Portnoy left, now they have Mike Mangini, who's a fantastic drummer and writer. But, you know, like all the bands I follow are just plagued with lineup change after lineup change. So, you know, even Kansas, I literally have a note saved on my phone of like, what are all the actual Kansas lineups, because they change violin players, they change bass players, they change frontmen, they change. The only consistent members are Rich Williams, one of the guitar players, and Phil Ehart, the drummer. Those are the only 2 original members in the current lineup. And even now that they sound like they did in the 70s, it's all different people. Different singer, different lead guitar, different keyboard player. They just brought on Tom Brislin, who's a new keyboard player from, I think, 2018 after. I'm digressing. But like all my bands like have just so many lineup changes, and I try to keep all that straight in my head.
I got you.
Driving me nuts. It's awful.
Well, like I was saying, I think the one big thing is that like his 70s sound, like for Alex Lifeson, the guitar sounds, you know, a much more classic style, like you were saying, more similar to Led Zeppelin. But you get to the
which
80s,
I loved.
And one of the things that I love is that they were a band that was not above taking influence from other bands. If you listen to his guitar playing, it sounds like he just listened to like all the Police albums in existence.
Yeah.
Basically went to like the Andy Summers school of like backbeat reggae guitar chord playing. And it's amazing.
There's a lot of that in the Rush that I've heard in the 80s lineup.
Yeah. And that's, to me, is like one of the most interesting parts of it, is that like I've never seen a band make such a more fundamental like foundation shift while not changing members. That was the impressive part to me. Like the whole entirety of the Grace Under Pressure album is basically, it reads like a Police tribute album, which is awesome. I mean, I love the fact.
Yeah, they got really into that reggae style back then. Like around that album was like they were really, really influenced by reggae and some other stuff. So I could see the Police influence there, definitely.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. That makes a lot of sense.
It's oh god, I could talk about them for hours. I'm not going to, because we'd be here all day.
Well, but we literally, so something that's kind of on the back burners for us with this Rock Talk show is doing like entire episodes where we really focus on a particular band. You know, Jeff and I have done it with Maiden a couple of times already, but
yeah, we did it with Periphery, but that was about it.
I just always love the fact that like it's like listening to several different bands, and the fan base loves every single era of them. With some exceptions. Some people who are more like for the 70s don't like the 80s as much, but my first albums I listened to were like yeah, like my first album that I listened to of theirs was Signals and Power Windows. Signals has my favorite song like of all time. Literally, my favorite song is Subdivision.
Subdivision.
Yep, exactly.
Me
Yep.
too. I was gonna say the same thing.
Yep.
I don't really like the album that much, but that song is probably one of the best songs ever written.
Yeah, I love it. It's amazing to me. And you're talking about like time signature changes there, Danton. It does. It changes from 7/4 back to 4/4. It doesn't really have any key changes. It never stretches outside of like the whole B minor and like, you know, use of like an F sharp major chord in there as well to get slightly technical. But it never strays outside of that. It's always in like that one flat 7, flat 6 range.
Yeah, I kind of hate to besmirch it a little bit, but for me, like the first time I heard Subdivisions was after I heard about 90% of Dream Theater's discography, where like we're talking like to the 16th note level, changing like 3/16, 5/16, 7/16, 7/8, 4/4, 3/4, 6/4, like all that stuff. For me, like Subdivisions always felt like really tame for a prog song.
Right.
And
well,
I know that's a
the
little
thing.
bit
Like
of
you
a
had,
hot take, but
you basically wound up going backwards, which is one of the things where it kind of ruins the experience, because if you go backwards like that, and like this is the band that my favorite band listened to, and I'm not seeing it, but I think it's because
that's kind of how I felt about it.
Yeah, like I think we're going in with the expectation of, oh, they're going to do these crazy time changes. I mean, let's be honest.
I love the crazy stuff. I love stuff that I can't count, stuff that like there are some Dream Theater songs that I've listened to a dozen times, if not hundreds of times, and I still don't know what they're really doing musically.
There's one band there's one band I do want to name drop, and Danton, I've told you about them before, that did this kind of stuff. You remember me talking to you a long time ago about a band called UK?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeff. I don't know if you want to preface this, but like
this is all you guys. I don't know much about these guys.
So go ahead, Jeff.
No, I don't have much to say about them. I just haven't heard that. I haven't heard UK mentioned in a very, very long time. Very long.
So UK is kind of a very weird tail end of like the 70s when it comes time for prog music, and is probably one of the greatest culminations of like individual talent in a mixture of true prog rock with also some jazz fusion sensibilities that I've ever seen. UK was basically a band born out of several different bands, musicians coming from them. It is born out of the remnants of King Crimson.
So it's kind of a super group, if you will.
Actually, yes, that's probably the best term I can give for it. So the members of the band were John Wetton on bass and vocals, Bill Bruford, who is formerly of Yes, and then also played with King Crimson along with Wetton, Alan Holdsworth, probably one of the most well-renowned like prog and jazz fusion guitarists of all time, who played with like Soft Machine and also played with, I think the group's name was Tempest, and also played on Bruford's solo albums, and Eddie Jobson, who was a keyboard player and electric violin player, who played with Roxy Music and Frank Zappa. And like, if you play with Zappa, you have a pretty hefty reputation to begin with.
Well, sure.
Exactly. Yeah. So the thing is that like
you had to be pretty much world class to stay on board with him for at least a tour.
Exactly. And like their first album, I heard that, it's kind of funny too, because I heard it when I was like 10 or 11, and I mistook it for Yes at the time for some reason. I don't know why that was. But my father introduced me to them, and it was an interesting album to listen to, because for a long time I really only liked like In the Dead of Night and the other two first songs on there, like By the Light of Day and Presto Vivace, which were the first 3 songs on the album. But as I went back and listened to it as I got older, around the time I was like 16 or 17, I'm listening to it like, this is absolutely like amazing. This is like really, really strong writing of like prog rock and jazz fusion mixed together. And it was only for that one album. They had a second and third album, but they changed the lineup. The second album, both Holdsworth left and Bruford left, and Terry Bozzio joined the group, and they were a 3-piece. So it was interesting to listen to, because like for a band like that, they did a lot of the more crazy time signature changes you were thinking Rush was doing, but they also did a lot more harmonically complex type of material. And a big thing of like the band's existence also coincided with like the introduction of the Yamaha CS80 synthesizer. I don't know if you know much about that or not, Danton, but
not really. Despite being a keyboard player, I really don't know a whole lot about the instruments themselves. I just know how to play them and make different stuff happen. But as far as like knowing the different instruments that were popular at the time and how they were used, it's not really my forte.
So like the CS80 was Yamaha synthesizer that came out around 1978, 79. Just for reference, this keyboard had so much in it, it was like 200 plus pounds, the keyboard. And it did a crazy amount of like sequencing. It basically looks like you were looking at like a command module from like NASA on a keyboard. Which it did a crazy amount of sequencing, effects, different filters, different changes. It was notorious for constantly going out of tune because it was an analog synth, obviously
Oh,
at the
okay.
time. So it was a notorious synthesizer, but that whole album is full of that sound of that synthesizer. And it's something really heavy duty that other bands weren't using right away. And it created a fantastic sound, that album. I can't recommend it enough to listen to. Like In the Dead of Night was the opening track, but there's other ones like Alaska and Time to Kill, which are both like 2 songs back to back that fit together. They're amazing. They're fantastic. The second album is good too. It's called Danger Money. But like I said, Terry Bozzio subbed in for Bill Bruford, and they didn't have a guitarist at all. So it's just keyboards, electric violin from Eddie Jobson, John Wetton playing bass and singing, and Terry Bozzio playing. So they stole another Zappa member as well. And there's some great tracks on there. The title track is great. The Only Thing She Needs is another good one. And Carrying No Cross, which is the last track on the album, is probably one of the most closely tied to what you're talking about in terms of prog, with crazy time changes and like dissonance going on that you were talking about with Dream Theater, Dan. So I would recommend that to anybody who wants to take a listen to them, but start with the first album and go to the second one. Otherwise it's gonna be a little interesting to listen to. Yeah, from 1978. The second one, Danger Money, is from 1979. But that's at the very tail end of like the progressive era. Had that happened like 3 or 4 years earlier, I could have seen them lasting a much longer time because they would have been like in the sweet spot for progressive rock. But because it came at the tail end of the 70s,
that sounds like it'd be a lot more up my alley.
Basically, like disco and
that.
punk kind of killed it, unfortunately. So, as it were.
Did it kill it, or was it more of an answer to it? Of like, let's try and like pull the reins back and do something that's a little more mainstream accessible, or the other way around? Maybe the progressive stuff is more of an answer to what was going on in the disco scene at the time. You know, that's probably a matter of debate.
I could have seen, I guess the best way I would have seen is that like punk originally was an answer to what a lot of people saw was like an overblown type of music with like the earlier prog from like the early 70s, especially because the punk movement obviously started over in Britain. Disco itself, I think, was just basically a culmination of where Motown was eventually transforming and heading to for pop music over here in the States. But I think because it clogged the airwaves so much that it basically, anything that wasn't related to that or similar to it kind of suffered that, not death by a thousand cuts, but basically it was not popular.
It was just destined to obscurity from the outset.
Yeah, unless you knew about a band's release it was a prog band that you wanted to listen to, it wasn't getting played on the radio.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about what you're saying with these prog guys is, I'm looking at UK, for instance. I pulled up their wiki page, and Terry Bozzio's involved, and so is John Wetton. Both of them went on to play in non-prog bands in the 80s.
Yeah, Missing Persons.
Asia.
And Missing
Persons, yeah. And Missing Persons for Bozzio, him and his
wife.
It's a long time ago. I just remember watching the videos were pretty awesome because she barely wore any clothes in those videos. And I was like 10. So I was like,
no, I mean, you're right. He went on to be a part of that group, and John Wetton went along with Steve Howe and Jeff Downes and Carl Palmer to form Asia, which was basically, I wonder if prog artists can make a pop rock album.
Yeah. I love Asia. I think Asia's a fantastic band. But yeah, they're not really a prog band. There's tiny little hints of prog like in their albums.
Yeah. A lot of great prog musicians can't hide the fact that they're prog. No matter how hard they try.
I think it's because like they know that more can be done. And
they're like, let me add in as much stuff as I can without going too far.
Like you take a listen, like there's basically a drum solo at the very end of like Heat of the Moment, but Carl Palmer on that.
Wildest Dreams.
What's this?
Wildest Dreams by Asia.
Oh, that's a fantastic.
Wildest Dreams. There's a whole, the drum takes over the lead in like the second half of the song. It's really neat. But so there's like a lot of prog, little tiny little nods to like their prog past through all their albums.
Exactly.
Great.
And having Steve Howe also helps with that a lot too.
Oh yeah.
I mean, the guy is like like you point to him like guitarist. This is why you learn how to play scales, because you can make every solo into a scale just starting on different notes and like run it up and down, and it's a guitar solo and it's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm not saying I'm making a very blanket statement in that case, but the guy is a great example of what like all that technical knowledge can do for you.
Yeah, and how it can lend itself really well to creative playing in a musical context.
Oh, absolutely.
But speaking on the same vein of prog musicians writing more like kind of poppy, more accessible stuff, the best Dream Theater example of that is their album Octavarium, which I
Oh, I
want to
remember you telling
say
me
is
about that.
like 2004, I think is when it came out. It was like right when I was getting really into them and a bunch of their like really progressive stuff was out. And then they decided to do this. And like they literally like claim in interviews that like we're trying to like not write as many prog things with this album. Like they were kind of going for more like we want to try to write like a Coldplay-esque U2-esque kind of song. But it's funny because almost every song on that album has these like crazy bridges of like lots of really interesting instrumental progressive stuff anyway. And then the ending title track is like 24 minutes long and it's like all set like to like the 24 hours of the day. And it's like a whole big crazy concept thing. And it goes through like a multi-movement thing. They feature this really interesting instrument called the continuum fingerboard, which is something I feel like not a lot of people know about. I don't know if it's just a Dream Theater thing. I know there's other groups out there that have used it since, but it was kind of
know this, but
it was kind of new technology at the time. This is like mid 2000s, and it's basically just like you could have a fretless guitar or bass.
Yep. Yeah, I made
basically like this like touchpad that kind of served like a keyless piano, where it had the full range of a piano, but it was just a giant touchpad and it was computerized, and you can like literally do all kinds of like legato slurs and slides and do all kinds of like, you know, timbre changes by sliding up and down the instrument vertically. And there's a really cool like YouTube demonstration with Jordan Rudess, the keyboard player for Dream Theater, using it because he was like one of the poster boys for it when it came out. And the whole first like 7 minutes, I think, of Octavarium is just him like just going nuts with the continuum, and it's fun, it's interesting, it's a little bit
almost kind of, the best way to describe it almost sounds like a 21st century touch version of the theremin.
Yeah, it's very theremin-esque, and it's really cool. I mean, I honestly, I don't really care much for the title track on the album because I feel like it's just like, let's just showcase this like thing and do whatever with it, and I feel like it doesn't really take off.
I mean, let's be honest, I've got some examples of like, let's showcase this instrument for the old.
Yeah, it's kind of a prog thing though. You want to like, okay, let's showcase like some of this new technology. Look at this cool toy, right? Exactly. Like, look at this weird different instrument. Let's see how many different sort of noise filters we can put through an electric violin.
Oh yeah,
you know, like there are tons of examples of that sort of thing. So that part of the album never stuck with me, but for me, like a lot of like the more short scale songs, I thought they actually kind of did really well, and especially the penultimate track on that. It's called Sacrificed Sons. It's a whole like big long epic written about 9/11, which you could tell they're like, we're gonna let ourselves get really prog with this, because they have this real extensive bridge section that's really really musically interesting, and it all ties together really really nicely. Also features a lot of orchestral writing, which is really cool. I don't know who in the band was doing that, or if they maybe brought somebody in. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but it's a really fantastic piece by them. But it's kind of cool, like that album is like, let's kind of like pull everything back after doing our like really more experimental and heavy stuff. Let's kind of like, let's try to write like stuff that could go on the radio, even though I'm not sure any of it actually did. I still think there's not a song there that's like less than 5 minutes. Maybe one of the first two, but yeah, who knows? There's only 8 tracks on the album, and I think it's over an hour, so go figure. But it's interesting nonetheless. It's cool to see, like, you know, bands like Asia, bands like Dream Theater, like kind of like get these like real high level musicians to try to like purposefully write something that's really simple in nature. I always find that it's super effective to making some really cool music. So,
well, the funny part is that, like, I always love for like the fact that Asia, that it was literally an experiment to see if they could write pop music, and literally wrote one of the top, like had one of the top albums in 1982 that also went up against 2 of the other top albums in 1982 in like Thriller and Toto 4. So like, talk about like a powerhouse year for songs, but especially having like, you know, Heat of the Moment going up against like the big 3 from Thriller with like Beat It and Billie Jean and Thriller itself, and going up against like Rosanna by Toto, and like, it's crazy that like it was as relevant as it was, you know?
Yeah, given what it was up against, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, you know, Toto, that's a bunch of like, you know,
session musicians
that are fantastic also. So
I should actually count them twice, because they basically played on the entire Thriller album.
True. Yeah. You know, going back to Dream Theater real quickly, Falling Into Infinity was, I believe, the first time that they tried to write stuff that's a little bit more.
You could definitely tell that. You could definitely tell, because it doesn't quite go off the deep end as much. It's still a fantastic album. I think it had, you know, Peruvian Skies is really interesting.
Yeah,
I think that's
the only album. I like that album a lot.
Yeah, I like it too. It's one of those, like, I go back to it once in a while and I'm like, oh, hey, this is actually pretty cool. It's not.
It's just not as good as Awake. Like, you know. Like,
yeah. Oh my God, Awake is one of them.
Or After, you know.
Yeah,
Because
but I think Falling to Infinity was the only one that featured Derek Sherinian on keyboard, right?
I think you,
That was
yeah,
after Kevin Moore left, then they brought in Sherinian, and then after
yeah,
that was Jordan Rudess for 6 Degrees, I
right,
believe.
right. 'Cause I think that was the only one. Well, the one that's a half live album, half really long song, Change of Seasons. I think he plays on that too. I could be wrong. It's been a long time. It's been a long time.
I don't remember what the keyboard player is for Change of Seasons, but half of it is just covers of other prog stuff.
Yeah.
You know,
I
which
think-
is
I
cool.
wanna-
Because they do it really well.
Yeah.
I think they actually did a cover of Heart of the Sunrise. Was that from that album?
Yeah, that's from Change of Seasons. I'm pretty
Gotcha.
sure.
I think they did the Wait, I don't think they did the Camera Eye, but I did hear a live version of them doing Rush's The Camera Eye.
Yeah, they've done a lot of.
Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me at all because Portnoy was a big Neil Peart fan, so they probably did a lot more Rush stuff live than anything else.
Oh yeah,
I'm sure they all nailed it because they're all like Berkeley grads or whatever. Berkeley dropouts or whatever.
I always love the concept of artists like getting a chance to play the stuff that like influenced them, because I wish more bands did that, just because like, otherwise the music gets not lost to time, but unless somebody actually like introduces it to you, you don't know it exists. I mean, a long time ago, probably
unless you're one of the rare few who goes out looking for it and kind of
you have to know where to look.
That's of the internet.
Yeah, exactly. That's the problem. And like about a good 5 or 6 years ago, I was teaching in the middle school, and the 9th grade class I taught was 20th and 21st century music. So we started out with rock history, and the funny part is a lot of the consensus I got from those students was, yeah, the music's good. We've just never heard of it before.
Yeah, and that really
kind of
that means all those parents out there are failing to let their kids get exposed to lots of different great music. It's like, well, think about like our last teaching job. You know, like how many kids we have coming in that are like 5 and 6 year olds that are like super into the Beatles, and it's like, not really. It's because your mom and dad are big Beatles fans that's the only music you've ever been exposed to. You know,
I always felt like that was like the default answer, because you get, some who were like, I like the Beatles and I also like Imagine Dragons. So like, there's no in between there.
Yeah, it's like whatever's popular and whatever your parents are into. And I feel like that's a crying shame, because there is so much more out there that,
I know,
this next generation is not getting exposed to unless it's like shoved in their face, which is really especially for now, for how freaking easy it is to just find something really obscure, like we were talking, we have a segment now going forward at the end of all of our Octop episodes where Jeff and I share an album with each other to expose each other to some new stuff. And last week we talked about Spock's Beard, which was something that we kind of touched on really briefly in passing in our last Prog Talk episode, but from a couple weeks ago. But like finding it, and like kind of digging in, and not even on Spotify, finding album after album of these really great selections by this band, and not even being the full extent of their output. But the fact is, like, so much of this music is just so easy to find if you just get on that good old Google machine and just start digging, and you could find some awesome stuff. And the fact that so many people just get like shoehorned into like whatever their immediate circle is in, and that's it, and they never really expose themselves to anything else. I feel like that's kind of the big impetus for what we're doing with this Rock Talk show, is let's talk about like a lot of different genres, not even just metal. I mean, metal is kind of the main focus because there's such a great birth of what's available in the metal world and metal community, and we want to kind of get that more into the forefront and expose that to a wider audience, sure, but just that basic idea of like, just get out there and try listening to different stuff. Those of you watching, give all these different albums that we've been mentioning, not just on this episode, but on every episode we've done, a fair shot. Even some of the more obscure Iron Maiden stuff that we're not super into, go check it out. Some of the crazy like Norwegian black metal stuff that's been out there, go check it out. It's so easy to find this stuff and access it due to the powers of the internet. And I feel like it's just something that it's so oft brushed under the rug and so oft unused that it just makes me very sad every week.
It is. It's a sad thing that a lot of these kids today, and I noticed it with my daughter growing up. We had to listen to the Disney Channel radio for a while. Okay,
sure.
And
there's
I
nothing wrong with that. Disney music is fantastic.
Well,
I teach it to my kids all the time. I love Disney.
Right, music. But Disney makes their own pop stars because they can. They're big enough to say we have this own radio station on Sirius.
They have enough influence.
But whatever we say that is cool and good, we're putting on this radio station to shove down your throat. Luckily for her, she thinks a little outside the box. So she's into her own stuff now. But that was one of the things I realized, like, oh my God, Disney just creates their own genre of music basically, and they say what's good and what's not because they're just shoving it down your throat. And if you're just going to listen to Disney music or watch Disney films or whatever, and they have their own award show where they just give out awards to their own people. It blew my mind when I started thinking like that. But not to get off on a tangent about Disney, the internet, like I always say about the internet. Yeah, right. The internet and music, the best thing that happened to music was the internet, because you can find anything you want.
Oh yeah.
And at the same time, the worst thing that ever happened to music was the internet.
Right. The only good thing about music on the internet is that if you're into something really obscure, you can find it easily. Like I go back and I say, like, when the internet when it was a new thing, when I was in college. That's how old I am. The internet was a new thing. And I was, into Iron Maiden. I was into Judas Priest, Halloween, Queensryche, all these bands that had this like power metal sound. But I didn't live in Europe, so I didn't know there was all these other bands that sounded like that until I got onto the internet. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a slew of bands.
Many. There's a plethora. Yeah,
dating back to like 89 and 1990, or real early 90s. Or even the thrash metal. There's so many bands doing that. Then when we talk about black metal, I would never have found a black metal band unless it was the internet. Pirate metal. We're going to talk about pirate metal.
There's going to be a whole episode on pirate metal coming, and I've been talking about it for week after week. I just finished this week, finishing my little adventure through all of Ailstorm's discography, and each album I got through made me love this band more so than the last. And I know that sounds completely crazy given from such like a crazy, like prog, weird technical keyboard guy like me, but Ailstorm is shaping up very quickly to be one of my favorite bands of all time.
For a good episode.
Yeah, I might bust out an eye patch for that episode, really, and put on like the nice little hat and like just go nuts, But that's a whole different talk, and we're gonna have some interesting things to talk about.
Yeah, so
I feel like the pirate metal bit should be kind of lumped into like a folk metal kind of entourage, where we explore like all the different aspects of folk metal. But that's a whole other topic. But
Jeff, like I said, I wanted to kind of talk to you about Genesis because, I mean, obviously it's kind of like a tale of two bands, and, you lived through the MTV era of seeing them on television rather constantly. So, I mean, I kind of wanted your opinion on like what you thought of the band for like both different sides of it. And there are basically like two eras of it with like two albums in between that are like connective tissue. So I kind of wanted to know what you think.
Yeah, well, and I've said this before. I think I actually mentioned on our first Prog episode about Genesis became this pop hit phenomena, especially towards the end of the 80s. Mm-hmm. And I can't stand their later output, like the stuff from the I Can't Dance album. Yeah. Oh God, it's not Genesis. And you mentioned this when we were on a little break here, like Invisible Touch. That's great stuff. Turn It On, great. They know how to write a pop song. They know how to write a great pop song, but then you got them going into that whole pop world, and it just was like, let's get back to Foxtrot, but they're not going to, Well,
I mean, I think a large part of it there is that like you had their fame coinciding with Phil Collins' like solo stardom. And it wasn't exactly at the same time, but like when Peter Gabriel left the band after Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, and it was an amicable split. It wasn't like there was any tension really going on there, but I know he had like a tough time in his life with the birth of his first child, and they basically agreed to part ways. But fun fact, the song Salisbury Hill by Peter Gabriel is about him leaving the band. But the thing is that, I didn't know if you knew that, Dan, or not.
I did not.
But yeah, so the thing is that like the next two albums, it was a 4-piece. They went through a bunch of searches for singers and couldn't find anybody, but both A Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering are some really interesting albums, but you can see the transition from like really, really heavy duty progressive and sometimes what I refer to as like Britishly peculiar progressive rock into being a much more, not pop oriented, but on its way to it. And I say that being fully aware that A Trick of the Tail has like probably one of the most well-known prog tunes in Dance on a Volcano, which is a great song, but then it also has one of their like heaviest songs in Squonk, like 2 tracks later, which is a great.
Okay, that's when they were starting to become, about to become the MTV darlings, like I call them. By the time they hit the whole Land of Confusion video, it was all about the video. It was all about Phil Collins. Like, they became Phil Collins' backing band for most of the time, I would
which
say.
was kind of essentially the criticism, because like those who really liked the earlier stuff just heaped a ton of hate on him for what he did to the band.
Yeah.
But like we mentioned earlier, it was really, as you got into the 80s, especially in the MTV era, you either adapted or you didn't exist as a prog band anymore.
Right.
That was
Yeah,
basically
absolutely.
what you had to do. And the thing is that, like, they were, in my opinion, the poster children for what a prog band could adapt into to survive, and were arguably, along with like Michael Jackson, probably one of the biggest driving forces behind like MTV's success as a returning band, not like a one-hit wonder type of situation.
Yeah, undoubtedly the most successful out of any of the prog bands.
Like,
Whether that is a merit to what they did musically or not is a matter of debate among not only the fans, but people that are just into the kind of prog scene overall. Like, are they like big sellouts for kind of getting into more like let's focus on making music videos and short, accessible songs and doing more of a pop kind of thing? Or should we focus more on the other bands that kind of still took things in their own direction?
I think, and Jeff and I talked about this briefly during the break, is that, each one of those albums up to Invisible Touch still had a longer song on it that was kind of a tie back to their roots. So like on that album, on Invisible Touch, which is the one that had obviously Invisible Touch and a few other pop songs on there as well, like Tonight, and name's escaping me, but the longer one on that album is called it's like a 2-part song called Domino, In the Glow of the Night, and I forget what the second part is called, but that's like about a good 8-minute long song, and it's definitely not quite a pop song. It has the trappings of it in the individual parts of it, but it's a pretty long song. I mean, you go back to their eponymous album, the one that like That's All and Mama came from, and the long one on there is a 2-parter with Home by the Sea, which is a 2-part one that's got like, speaking of which, with Halloween coming up, it's got like cool, like, creepy house on the edge of a cliff near sea, kind of vibes going on. Or you go back to the Abacab album, and the title track literally is like 7 minutes long. They cut it short for the radio.
Yeah, it was like a whole big crazy bridge that fleshes out there. I played that with a cover band when I was in high school, and it was really fun, really keyboard heavy, lots of really cool proggy stuff. It's a good time.
Yeah,
the full
there's
version
that,
is
or
definitely
like
recommended.
there's like
Not the
that.
radio
There's like Me and Sarah Jane, which is a great song on that album. Another one that has like a reggae kind of sound to it. I refer to it as like Genesis's cover of a Police tune, basically.
Okay.
They had here's a fun fact. I don't know if you guys knew this. Like the Duke album, the one from 1980 that Turn It On Again came from.
Mm-hmm.
They actually had an intention of having an entire suite of music that was about 27 minutes long on that album altogether, which was supposed to be Behind the Lines, Duchess, Guide Vocal, which is a short, like context-driven songs about a minute long afterwards, Turn It On Again, Duke's Travels, and Duke's End, which is the very last one off the album. And you can hear it because they revisit some themes later on. And like when they performed it live, they performed it as like a 25-minute long suite of music altogether, but they broke it up on the album to make it a little bit more palatable for those who were listening, in between stuff like Misunderstanding and Man of Our Times and Heat Haze and all that. But like stretching back to like, and then there were 3, which is the first one when there were 3 of them on the album. That was the one that had Follow You, Follow Me, which is like their big first solo, like single hit, basically. Not solo, but like single hit on its own. And that's where you could hear that they were starting to move in that direction. They still had songs that were really quite, had like some proggy elements to it, but that was where you started to see they were moving that direction. And I don't fault them for it. I think it developed more organically than purposefully driven, like, here, let's do this thing purposefully so that we're like in the spotlight for MTV, because their popular stuff started prior to MTV's arrival. So, there's stuff there. I mean, like I would say, if I recommended albums to go back and listen to, besides taking a listen to the earlier stuff, which is the Peter Gabriel era, A Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering are fantastic albums to listen to along with Duke. That's one of my favorite ones. So I'd recommend it. There's a ton of early stuff to talk about. I know, Jeff, you had mentioned Foxtrot, which is home to like one of the grand old anthems for prog rock, and Supper's Ready.
Yeah, Supper's Ready. We mentioned that in the last episode. That I love that song. I always did. It's amazing. It's amazing tune. So when you put that up against, I Can't Dance, it's like they're 2 different bands.
Yeah, the thing is that like the change in time from 1972 to 1992, that 20-year time is an astounding change in like
Sure.
what would have been acceptable on an album. Like had they done that 20 years later, they probably would have been laughed out of the record company that they were trying to sell it from.
Right. Now I will say this: The Invisible Touch is a really good album. You know, that's probably to me the last like really, really great one that I liked. You know,
it's where I stopped listening to them.
Right. Right, because the next one in 1991's "We Can't Dance," like I mentioned, like that one I just don't like at all.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like a lot of electronic drums on it. I think, if I remember correctly,
Yeah.
it's probably. I think the last time I listened to it was 1991. So, but I remember being like, no. But Invisible Touch is something I'm going to go back to because I haven't listened to that in a long time. But I'm looking at it now. I'm looking at the track list and I'm thinking, yeah, there's some really good stuff on there, and I think I may revisit that this weekend.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Go. Yeah.
The shame of it is that like there's some tracks that didn't make that album that I actually like better than some of the ones on the album.
Like as is true with so many.
Well, the last one, which is an instrumental, which I think the name of the tune is The Brazilian. There's a tune that didn't make the album called "Do the Neurotic," like as in 3 words, and it was another instrumental tune. If you want to take a look at that one when you get a chance, Jeff, it's actually a really good one. It's definitely from the same era, but I wholeheartedly wish it would have made the album over The Brazilian, myself personally.
Probably
but
other
yeah,
fans
I mean,
too.
they just output a ton of material, which is fantastic. They had enough to write like another album in the mid 80s easily and still have it be popular, which is great. But I mean, like when we're talking about like prog bands trying to be popular, they're like the poster children to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. You know, and you can't discount Yes's 80s output either. They really calmed down compared to the stuff from the 70s. They were also, you know, MTV darlings for a while, you know.
Well, does anyone know here what year it was that Rick Wakeman left to kind of spin off and do more of his solo stuff? I know he was a big part of it.
1978 or 79, prior to the Drama album.
Well, there you go. You know, for all the 80s, they didn't have Rick, and he's out doing his own solo stuff in the late 70s and into the 80s.
The keyboardist for the Drama album was Jeff Downes, the keyboardist from the Buggles, and then after that, the keyboardist was Tony Kaye, who was the keyboardist on the Yes album, which is Steve Howe's first album, where I think that's where Starship Troopers came from. No, that might have been from Fragile. I think it's definitely where Yours Is No Disgrace came from, which, God, I love the guitar solo.
You mentioned the keyboard player from the Buggles, which is just, that always blows my mind.
I know. And the thing is that, like, imagine like hearing Drama as your first album and hearing Trevor Horn singing, and then like hearing the other ones. I'm like, what happened to Trevor Horn? And it was just some like a weird thing. I'd never seen that like anywhere else in music, where like another group just joins and they make an album. And it's weird, especially because like everybody knows the Buggles as like, Video Killed the Radio Star, first video on MTV, of course, which I'll never forget the reaction showing that to students, and they're like, this is a really weird video. I'm like, yeah, it kind of is. But like still it's rather appropriate that they chose that as the first one, considering the song came out like 2 years prior. But that sensibility worked fine for 1980 when the Drama album came out. But for 90125, which, fun fact for those of you that ever wanted to know why it's named that, it was actually the catalog number for the album. So yeah, exactly. Imagine like, I have no idea what to name the album. What's the catalog number for the company? 90125. Perfect. Let's do that.
Cool. There you go. Put it in.
And done.
Not to be confused with 90210. But at the same
that's
time,
a whole different thing.
But I mean, that album is a great album. I mean, Dan, you and I listened to that, quite a few years ago, and we're kind of marking like how 80s it sounds. There's one tune that's close to being like a cappella almost, which is Leave It. Mine like a drum part. Which is great. The video for that's really weird too. It looks like they like put all their images through like a thing meant to flatten it out, and it like goes all around the screen. Somebody had fun with the computer graphics that day.
Oh yeah. When that song came out as a single, there were like, I want to say probably 10 different versions of that video that MTV would play. Some of them, all the guys were just standing there watching or singing to the camera. Another one, they were turned around backwards. You just saw the back of their heads for the entire video. Another one, they were flying all over the place.
Oh yeah.
It was an interesting time. I like the song. It reminds me of the Spock's Beard song Gibberish. There's a Spock's Beard song that's called Gibberish that is it's a lot of acapella stuff like Leave It, so it's really neat. You could see that Spock's you know, they wear their Yes influence on their sleeve
Well,
a lot of
the
times.
funny part is that comes full circle too, because Steven Wilson from that band has done a lot of remixes of Yes music. As a matter of fact, there's an interesting kind of like a very kind of niche tidbit, but a lot of prog bands have hired Steven Wilson of Spock's Beard to do remixes of their music for like in the past few years, and they've been lauded as some fantastic mixes of older songs. But in general, and this is going to be interesting for those of you that are audiophiles out there, it kind of takes away the loudness treatment that a lot of albums got in the 2000s when they got remastered, and basically makes it so you could sit down and listen to it and hear all the little things that get drowned out when the loudness treatment happens to it. And it's amazing to hear. It's like hearing the song in a totally different light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of that loudness treatment. Not a fan of it.
I mean, it works well when you're in the car, but like I even have some versions of Genesis albums where like they were remastered and I can hear stuff that wasn't there previously, but there are other parts that I can't hear, or some things that were tweaked and fixed from like the master track. And I'm like, that's cool.
Well, it's like we want to take
like
both of those versions and put them in a blender.
Well, that's the thing. I made sure that I kept like the original versions and didn't like, completely get rid of the newer versions either, or the old ones, so that I have them both available to me. But it's interesting because it does come full circle. You have those artists who were influenced by those older bands who then come back to basically make essentially what is like a labor of love, spending all that time mixing down and remixing music to make it palatable again for a new audience, which is awesome. And the funny part is you mentioned Yes's 80s albums, but the one we didn't get a chance to mention is Big Generator.
Oh yeah, how could I forget that one? That's a great album too.
It's interesting. That is one of the only albums of theirs that I actually like the back half better than the front half. And I say that being full well aware that by the time I was born, CDs were a thing.
It's okay.
But I mean, like, oh God, I got to pull up the track list real quick just to kind of remind myself of the names of them. But like things like Love Will Find a Way is a good one. There was a video for that was great, but then there was also like Final Eyes and I'm Running, which are fantastic tracks. Big Generator was great, but there was like a radio edit and then the original one, and it was full 80s-ness. No two ways.
Rhythm of Love. Rhythm of Love is another track.
Yeah. Rhythm of Love reads like a Beach Boys tribute at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Which is
okay.
awesome.
I can do that.
I was gonna say that's not a bad thing at all by any means.
No, it's interesting too, because like you hear the song and it's actually a pretty rocking tune. I like it a lot. So there's some great stuff on there.
Yeah, that's a great album. Speaking of the Beach Boys, our first episode of the progressive music that we talked about, we mentioned Pet Sounds as being probably the first prog rock album, either that or Sgt. Pepper's.
Well, that's the thing. And the funny part is I even told Danton about this. Like the Beatles get credit for starting a lot of genres, but I think it's just that they dabbled in so many, it basically started that seed in multiple different directions. And you're right. Yeah. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band is an interesting direction to go, because while it can be thought of as a prog album, I think of it more as a concept album than anything else.
Sure.
Which often the two are rather
in a sense, it's kind of both.
Most concept albums can be thought of as prog, but not all of them. With a few exceptions. Think of like The Wall, obviously.
Yeah,
I was going to say Pink Floyd is a really good example of that, because they often get lumped into the progressive vein as well. But
I consider them art rock more than anything else, like psychedelic and art rock.
Yeah,
I mean, some of the very older, their very first like couple albums were way more proggy than their other stuff. Like Saucer Full of Secrets, for instance. Uma Guma, I think that's how it's pronounced. That album just kind of is really weird.
Oh yeah, the first few albums are very odd. But it's Pink Floyd, so it is what it is. Well, I had to do an episode just on them alone.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we could talk about them for a long time. Like I say about Gilmour, man, like that guitar player, he doesn't play a lot of notes, but every note counts.
He's probably one of the greatest examples of Negative Space doing a lot of work.
Yeah, Negative Space doing positive work. Absolutely.
Exactly. But it's interesting too, because like there's so many ways all of this intertwines, but like when it comes time for concept albums, I mean, obviously you're talking about like Lamb Lies Down on Broadway is a great one. Tales from Topographic Oceans by Yes is another good one. You're talking about stuff like 2112 and Hemispheres are great, concept albums. For a band that's not like what most of us would think of as quintessential prog, or at least I don't think of it as like quintessential prog, they probably have more concept albums than half the other bands out there.
Yeah.
or concept half
Yeah.
albums.
And while concept albums are definitely a popular medium to convey your progressive ideas, if you're in a prog rock band, it's a really popular thing to do. It's not necessarily so black and white as if you make a concept album,
It's
you're a
prog
progressive rock band.
Right.
Yeah, it's definitely not the case at all. There are plenty of not progressive rock bands that have made concept albums.
Oh,
and
yeah.
they may be slightly progressive in nature sometimes.
Right, like the album I gave you last week, Operation Mindcrime by Queensryche.
Yeah,
You don't consider
great
them a prog
concept
band.
album. I wouldn't really consider it prog at all.
Right.
There's
more than
another
I would
good example of
consider
that
it
too, that like
grade A 80s metal. But yeah,
I was gonna say that, like, in terms of even a concept album, like a concept album light is, oddly enough, the Paradise Theater by Styx. It
Yeah.
has some concept elements to it, but yeah, it's all around like the Paradise Theater in Chicago, where the band was basically based out of. And there's different parts of that being talked about throughout the album, but obviously they also sprinkle like other songs throughout it too. But yeah, you're right. Not all concept albums are prog, but a good bit of them are.
yeah, and a good bit of really big prog rock bands eventually, if not more frequently, will do a concept album.
I wish more groups had done that, because I love it as a concept itself.
I see what you did there.
I didn't mean it as a pun, but yeah, it's
But the idea of doing a concept album,
yeah.
the idea where all your songs tie together and tell one grand story and all of the pieces are intertwined, especially if you take more of the classical convention of developing your ideas and themes, motifs that stem from song to song, that kind of large scale form, which is a lot more akin to 18th century, 19th century classical romantic music. Stemming that into a rock medium is a big part of the progressive rock camp's appeal for like the term musicians comes up a lot when you're talking prog rock. Like we mentioned, like right at the beginning, you were talking about how like each one of those members is either classically trained or they're just an absolute world-class virtuoso in their particular instrument, and it shows in the playing, and it more so shows in the writing, where like you get this idea, like you could tell some of these guys are really well trained classically because they can tell the overall overarching scale of a sonata form, where like, all right, I have one single set of ideas and I develop them in ways X, Y, and Z. And like, to see that all kind of stem through in a rock medium, I think is a big part of that appeal for musicians like us that are classically trained, that eventually kind of explore that stuff and kind of see like, how do these like sort of antiquated songwriting traditions bleed into a more modern medium?
Absolutely.
And it's a big part of the appeal. That's why I love Dream Theater so much. You have something like the 12-step suite, where there's like one song on a successive series of several albums that all deal with the central theme of the 12 steps of recovery from alcoholism.
Interesting.
Which starts off with Glass Prison on 6 Degrees of Inner Turbulence. And then what's really cool is like pretty much on each album, just one piece of it comes out. I think there's 5 songs total. Really quick, I'll kind of go into this. So you have Glass Prison on 6 Degrees. And then the opening song on the next album, Train of Thought, is called As I Am. And it starts with the last chord from Glass Prison.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, no, sorry, not Glass Prison. From the last song on 6 Degrees. It fades in the last chord, and then it transitions into the starting bit of Train of Thought.
That's cool. I like that.
As I Am. And then you get into the song. The second song in the 12-step suite is called This Dying Soul. And then you get into Octavarium has the opening track, Root of All Evil, is the third one. And like they did this pretty much from 6 Degrees all the way up to maybe Black Clouds and Silver Linings. I'd have to listen through all of them in a row again to double check and see how the pieces connect. But for one thing, album goes into album in one way, and then there's this one little hanging thread of this one song on each album. By the time you get to Systematic Chaos, you have Repentance, which is their kind of slow chill jam, and then it all ties together in the Shattered Fortress on Black Clouds, which then ties in themes from each of the previous 4 tracks and ties them all together in like kind of like a mass medley. And it sounds like the end of like one of Mozart's final symphonies, where like all of the 5 individual themes come back and intertwine with each other. Lyrics come back, keys come back, so many musical elements tie themselves together. And actually what I've done in recent years is I've taken just the single tracks from each of those albums and made them into a playlist. Like when I
Nice.
listened to each of the songs of the 12-step suite from start to finish and kind of see the story that it tells, and it made me much more easily make connections from each song as far as what material is getting used. And it's very, very that kind of old school symphonic classical traditional where like, all right, here's this one idea that's going to develop and it's going to go to this key and I know it's going to go to that key, and then they do this key which is totally different and it kind of throws me for a bit of a loop, and stuff like that is just what attracts me so much to not just Dream Theater but pretty much any progressive band that's capable of doing that kind of stretching one idea across several albums, or just the idea of making one solid concept album like Scenes from a Memory that they did in '97, which is a whole one and done story from start to finish, and it's really, really musically sound. There's not a single dud of a track on that whole album. If there is one album I recommend to anyone who's like, oh, what's Dream Theater? Listen to Scenes from a Memory. If you do nothing else, you owe it to yourself because it's just an absolutely fantastic piece of music. And it's a true testament to pretty much what they were, I would argue, in their prime. So, but that's
I would give them Images and Words first, actually.
that's interesting, and that is definitely one of their best, one of their strongest albums and one of their most often recommended by a lot of Dream Theater fans. I can totally understand why you go for something like that.
Yeah, but I would give them Scenes from a Memory second, because I would say, okay, if you like what they're doing in Images and Words and you like Metropolis Part 1, here's Part 2, and then watch their heads explode.
Yeah. Which, funny enough, Metropolis Part 1 was written, and the whole Part 1 part of the title was just a joke. They never really even planned on making a Part 2 at the time of writing Part 1. They were just like, we want to write this cool big prog thing to end our album, and just whatever. And then they were like, oh, maybe we should revisit that. And they even play with some of those ideas, and they take something that was originally not intended to be developed into something else, and they made it into something else. And I think that's just a further testament to the true work of genius that's really behind the bulk of that band. Not just Portnoy, because he was of course the big influence at the time. He was the main guy that wrote a lot of their stuff, but he wasn't the only guy. Petrucci did a lot of the writing. There's a little bit by the singer James Labrie. Each of the members are pretty much equal contributors to the overall writing process, I think. And it's really fun to kind of watch that in their various vlogs and documentaries and things. Fascinating band. I love them. They were one of my first
the funny
bands.
part there is that, like, Danton will tell you how much have I listened to Dream Theater?
Not nearly enough.
By not nearly enough, he basically means only when he showed it to me. And the funny part is, I've listened to some of it when he showed it to me, and the thing is, I'm not sure what it is, and I still haven't figured it out, but I am not a fan of modern prog.
Yeah, and well, it's a lot heavier, and that could be a turnoff for a lot of like more old school prog fans, because there's a lot more emphasis on lower tunings. There's a lot more emphasis on really like hyper aggressive drumming. Portnoy does a lot of like stuff with double bass and like lots of excessive filling and stuff like that. So that could be
especially from Train of Thought on, as far as the heaviness.
Train of Thought is their heaviest album to date. Yeah. Even though they've done on later albums, but they're definitely really heavy for a progressive band, and I could see why that's a little off-putting for some prog rock guys out there. I know a lot of people don't like the singer. A lot of people don't like James Labrie, which I've never understood. He's one of my favorite.
I have no room to talk. Being a Rush fan, you have no room to talk about not liking a singer. But no, you make a good point. I think the toughest thing I had in terms of getting over that, of listening to newer stuff, is that I'm not a big fan of heavier stuff, and metal to some extent as well. I know that it's almost sacrilege to say, given the format of what we're doing here, but like,
it's not metal talk, it's rock talk. We could talk.
That's true, but I never really grew up with much of it, so like it never was something that I normally got involved with, and because all the stuff I listened to is 70s and 80s mostly, it was just something that basically passed me right by.
Yeah,
and having grown up with the majority of musicians that I knew were all like people in concert band and people in chorus and orchestra. Our common thread was whatever we were playing in class or for our ensemble. So there wasn't any like, I've got friends of mine.
There wasn't a lot of exposure to the heavier stuff that was going on.
Exactly. It was basically, oddly enough, a lot of what my parents listened to, and then I kind of went on my own, but along the same lines. So like I've told you before, some of the Dream Theater stuff I do like what I've heard. Other stuff that's heavier I have a harder time with, but that's more me than anything else.
Fair enough. It's a matter of taste, and that's all what this is about. It's a lot of us just sharing our opinion.
Oh yeah.
I would say, as far as Dream Theater is concerned, they're definitely no longer the only like heavy progressive metal band.
Oh, absolutely.
They were definitely one of the first. and they kind of stem back. I think when Dream and Day Unite was 88, 89. So they were
89,
like
yeah.
89. So yeah, they were definitely like a late 80s into the 90s where they kind of hit their stride. And it's a lot heavier than any of the stuff by Yes or Kansas or Rush.
Oh, absolutely.
Or whatever.
There was one 80s prog band that I always forget the name of that I think was along that line. Was it Marillion, maybe?
Marillion, yeah. Great band.
Yeah, I never
band.
had a chance to listen to them much.
I gotta check them out.
Jeff,
I mentioned them on the first part of this discussion of the last episode that we did about Prog. I mentioned Marillion, but like you said,
I wrote those guys.
I mentioned a lot of bands, and we just kind of skipped right
by.
Yeah,
we flew through that episode. There was so much covered in so little time. I figured we have to do another one sooner rather than later. So this is kind of like one of the first of a series of many like returning topics that we're gonna then be coming back to in a lot of cases. So
absolutely,
yeah.
This so the first time we got to really do that.
Let's shift a little bit here, and I'll ask you guys a question. If there was like a prog band or a prog album by a band that you can introduce somebody to, like that's like, okay, you want to listen to prog, this is where it's at. What would you suggest to them if they're a music fan?
Fragile by Yes. That would probably be the one that I would say, like, this is quintessentially what you listen to when you want to find out what prog is all about. That is the album to listen to, just because of the impact it had, just because of the popularity of, things like Heart of the Sunrise and Roundabout, South Side of the Sky. I mean, it's, oh my God, it's a fantastic album. And it is literally like, it is, to me, the prog album to listen to when you want to introduce somebody to the format.
Yeah, it's a great album. There's not a bad track on that album. I can't argue with that. And Danton, what would yours be?
Point of No Return by Kansas. I feel like anyone who knows me could have expected that a mile away, but
yeah, of course,
it's definitely their strongest album. It's definitely one of the. I would argue, I could sit here and write a book on this and fight anyone who says otherwise, but I would say it's one of the best rock albums ever written. Period. End of story. It's definitely one of the best progressive albums because, for one thing, it's really short. You don't have a lot of length. It's not like big, crazy, long slog tracks that are 15, 20 minutes long. They're all pretty short and pretty modest in length. There's 10 different songs on it. It's really fast paced. Each song is very different. You do get Dust in the Wind, so it's like, oh, here's that familiar thing that I've heard Kansas do before. And it's funny enough, even though it was never intended for that album, it kind of fits in and complements it really well because it's a nice little air of breathing room. I think it's the 7th track on the album, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I've actually listened to it. But the opening track is fantastic. You have just enough prog elements that, like, okay, this is going to be something different in taste and style than what I'm kind of known to. But yeah, okay, they kind of fit in this kind of classic rock vein really well. It's really colorful. You have a lot of presence of violin. There's a lot of keyboard playing. The guitar playing is fantastic. Every aspect of the band is really solid. The singing is great. There's lots of great harmonies in pretty much every single song, except for those that don't have, the second track called The Spider is like, that's where it gets like really proggy, but it's like 2 minutes. It's like this short little burst of like crazy, insane stuff. And then they go into something else. Sorry, not the second. Oh, is it the second track? Yeah. No, I think it is. Anyway, but it's a really solid album. Again, there's not a single dud on there. You have a really interesting kind of more philosophical song called Portrait, which arguably is written about Albert Einstein. So it's got a little bit more of that kind of like more like emphasis on like focusing on like this kind of genius persona, which is kind of a going trend in a lot of progressive music to kind of do something that's a little more brainiac, a little more nerdy, which is fun. The lyrics are really colorful and interesting. They make you think. It's really easy to follow along with what's going on in each song. It's not really so much of a thing where like everything has to tie together in some grand scheme, but it's like, here's just a nice little sampling platter of all things that you can come to know and love in progressive rock music. And from there, if you like that and you like what you hear with Kansas, then I recommend you go back and do the previous album, Left Overture, which I would say is not as progressive. It's got more of a classic rock kind of thing to it. It's a little more straightforward and it's great. It's fantastic. But I would say Point of No Return is just that much better.
Let's hear your closing thoughts on prog rock.
Sure. Russ, let's start with you.
Okay. My closing thoughts on prog rock is that it's one of the parts about rock history and rock music that I think I've found the most enjoyment of throughout its entire history, just because of the concept of it's not just bashing 4 chords most of the time. It has a true, like you said before, it's kind of a musician type of situation. And I think probably some of the most enjoyable music I've listened to came from that genre. But I know that the era in which it existed was kind of more of an exception that proved the rule rather than the other way around. And the unfortunate part is, yeah, it's basically that early stuff from the 70s it's gone. It was a one-time thing for about a good 5 to 6 years, and that part's gone. But the influence has been a very, very wide-ranging influence for probably some of the most prominent metal and prog metal bands to this day. And I'm glad that the heritage of that still exists, not only from those artists who were from back then who performed them, but for the artists who listened to them and were inspired by them, probably more so than most other bands that you can really mention, like in terms of the absolute influence that you can hear in their music exists from that. And, you know, while I wish some of that stuff that was like the older stuff still existed, you know, obviously it can't always be like that, but I'm really glad for the influence that it left.
For me, the general consensus from today's talk is dig beneath the surface. You definitely owe it to yourself. A lot of these prog bands woefully go with this reputation of the brief moments in which they've all dabbled into making mainstream accessible content. So, you know, if you only know Rush because of Tom Sawyer, listen to more of their stuff. If you only know Kansas for Dust in the Wind, dude, you don't know Kansas at all. If you know what I mean? So like take a look at these bands and dig beyond the stuff that just made the charts and the stuff that was played on the radio, because all of these bands we've talked about, as different stylistically as they all are, all kind of have that core in common of they're really so much more than what they are at face value. And if you dig a little deeper, you can find some really, really fun stuff. And if you're anything like me, Kansas changed my life. When I first got that like collection of those like 70s records, you know, they're self-titled and Monolith and Mask, and the two that I mentioned before, talking about Left Overture, Point of No Return, you know, each of those albums are knockouts. And you know, and that's not, I didn't even mention Song from America, and that's just me gushing about one band that I know that particular era really well and kind of explored the full extent of that discography. But doing that was a real journey for me, and I feel like so many other listeners out there can benefit from doing the same thing with pretty much each of these bands.
Absolutely.
So dig deep, listen to more than just what was on the radio, because these bands, that stuff is like nothing compared to what else they have in store.
What I like about these prog bands is they're always challenging. Whenever I want to hear something and just kind of get away from that normal 4/4 kind of normal heavy metal, we'll say, you know, I could throw on something by Dream Theater and be challenged. It'll wake my mind up because I'm hearing, you know, these changes and these you know, lyrical concepts that are more than just what's on the surface. A lot of times, even when we talked about lyrics before, a lot of times with Dream Theater, especially, you got to dig a little bit deeper, and there's another meaning, another meaning to these lyrics, a little bit deeper, kind of like Rush. It's usually not as deep, but still, it's there.
And that's Dream Theater could get pretty deep. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. That's another thing about prog that I like. It's lyrics, because I'm a big lyrics fan. I always, like, I've said it before. Like, if a song's half decent but it has fantastic lyrics, it elevates that song to me. Yeah, to me, and that's why I like Rush. You know, I don't love Rush, but I like them a lot. We only scratch the surface again with just a handful of bands. Again, we could do a part 3 on prog rock, but
which we definitely will.
Oh, yeah. You know what?
And maybe we'll bring Russell back and we'll bring some other people in.
Yeah,
get some more.
Maybe we should go back to the beginning. You know, just talk about the early prog rock, because I didn't even mention Jethro Tull. That's one of my favorite bands.
Oh my God, we didn't even get there.
I love Tull.
Oh, I should feel ashamed.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, me too.
Benefit.
They are so fantastic and out of this world. Absolutely.
Thick as a brick.
Oh,
I mean, I could just go on and on. You know, they're not a metal band, even though they won a heavy metal Grammy, but you know, whatever.
Yeah, well, because they're that good. It's they are just fantastic.
We scratched the surface, and we talked about, you know, the few bands we talked about before, a couple new ones here and there, but again, don't just listen to what is being force fed to you.
Yeah, you do that, you're shortchanging yourself.
Moving on to our final segment of the show, which is a really, really cool thing that we like to do. We got two more things to do. We got to talk about our music assignments that we give each other each week, and then of course what else we're listening to during the week. So let's start with the music assignments, because I gave you something that was way out there in left field compared to
something that's not prog at all. But
it's not prog.
The music assignments are never tethered to the topic we're talking about. It's just a matter of what are we digging. You know, Jeff is going to try to share with me stuff that I've never heard before, and vice versa. So we're, you know, in addition to continuing to delve into these genres in greater detail, we're now going to kind of bounce around. So Jeff shared with me some doom metal, which is really fun because doom metal's been on my bucket list for years now, of like, oh, I got to check this stuff out because I would probably really like it. It's characterized by being really slow, really heavy, really dark. I like that kind of stuff. And sure enough, I was absolutely pleased with what I heard this week. And me being on my big pirate metal kick, you know, we were just talking about Ailstorm before. So I figured, let me see if maybe Jeff didn't hear the newest album they put out, The Curse of the Crystal Coconut. So let's start with that. So that was my first Ailstorm album, because I went into them and just worked from the most recent to the oldest from what's available on their Spotify. And that, like, 3 or 4 tracks in, I got completely hooked in, and I was like, I got to listen to everything this band did. So I would love to hear Jeff's thoughts on The Curse of the Crystal Coconut by Ailstorm.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure for me to talk about this. Now, I knew who Ailstorm was. I knew who they were. I heard a couple songs. I knew they were a power metal band before they were called Ailstorm. They had a different name, like it was like Battleborn or something.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, something real generic and power metal-y. I think they have like 1 or 2 albums like that. But I knew of Ailstorm.
Probably awesome.
I knew of Ailstorm. I knew like the videos they have online were always interesting. But this is like the first time I ever listened to a full album by Ailstorm. And this past week, let me just say, number one, it's crazy. I love it. I love this album. Now, sometimes it sounds like real great power metal. Sometimes it sounds like video game music.
Yeah, there's a lot of like really weird synthy kind of stuff. It like really goes out of left field. Yeah, it's crazy.
It had like some parts that have like almost a punk rock vibe to them. Mm-hmm. They're very similar in vibe to a lot of folk metal, because I really like a lot of folk metal.
There's a good bit of fiddle. There's a good bit of hurdy-gurdy. There's a lot of accordion. If you're into that kind of stuff, you are in for a treat with Ailstorm. Not just The Curse of the Crystal Coconut, but all of their albums.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This, from what I've heard from them before, I think this is the one that is the most like centered of all their music. It's like they know what they are now. You know,
it's funny you should say that. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's how I feel. It's you know, the other stuff I heard, some of it sounded like, the older stuff sounded more like Corpaclani than anything. Now I think they have more of their own sound and their own style with this album. Now vocally, it's nothing spectacular. Their vocalist is not a great vocalist, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's a lot of gang vocals.
So who cares?
He's a pirate, yeah. So he sings like a pirate. Now the whole album I thought was great, but there's a couple standout tracks I want to mention. Yeah, Treasure Chest Party Quest.
The opening track. Yeah. Oh my God.
You know what you're in for. You know, it's just like bang, and here it comes, you know?
Yep.
The one I like the most is Tortuga, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Correct.
Oh, I was hoping
that mixes a couple different genres, kind of. There's a little bit of like gangster rap in it. And there's like
not to mention, they bring in the as a guest feature, the lead singer for Rum Ahoy, another famous pirate metal band.
Right. I saw that in the video, yeah.
Comes in and he starts throwing down these like weird hip hop bits, but like the main riff is kind of proggy. It's
yeah.
It's kind of real syncopated staccato.
Yeah, it's syncopated like a little singer doing there.
Yeah, it's nuts. Well, there's a bunch of silly stuff and some keyboard bits. At the end, there's like a whole like multi-part like chorus thing, and it sounds like something straight off a Michael Jackson album, dude. It's ridiculous.
Yeah,
that was really nice. I was like, this is one of my new favorite bands, probably. Period. Yeah, and I'm gonna check out.
There's a really nice vocal at the end. Yeah. Compared to like all the other like raspy kind of harsh vocals at the end, there's this nice little chorus.
It opens up.
And it ends.
Yeah. Oh,
it is
so good.
It's if I had to tell someone to listen to Ailstorm, like that's a song I would give them first. That's great. The one I thought was hilariously catchy is Shitboat.
Yeah.
I won't even sing the lyrics to it because they're pretty offensive.
Oh,
but man, is it funny.
Not as bad as F with an anchor, but we'll get there later.
The other one was Call of the Waves. That reminded me of a Halloween song. That reminded me of a power metal song. It's
really symphonic. Yeah, great keyboard player. I don't know the keyboard players, but there's a lot of really cool symphonic stuff, like weird use of different chords and stuff. It's great.
So I recommend that album wholeheartedly to anyone who wants to just listen to some fun stuff, man. And I said this to you before. The best descriptor. I want to see them live. I've seen some live video. I think going to an Ailstorm show would be fantastic, man.
Post-COVID, Jeff, we're going. We're definitely going.
They have a huge rubber duck. A big 20-foot tall rubber duck on the stage with them for some reason. Like they're like the heavy metal like Jimmy Buffett. They have. It seems like it's crazy. I love it. Ailstorm's great. Thank you. Another
definitely a great first exposure to the band. For those of you who've never heard of these guys and want to get into something a little different, check it out. There is something in the album for you. And I'm really glad that Jeff didn't hear it, because I was kind of thinking, well, what am I going to show Jeff that he hasn't already heard before? So
it's great.
Yeah, so it was fun.
Now it's your turn.
All right, so the band was Solitude Aeternus, which is apparently one of the big definitive doom metal bands. Through the Darkest Hour was the album I got assigned. And for me, given that I have really no experience with doom at all, I only knew a little small piece of what to expect, but for some reason I kind of put it into my head that all doom metal was characterized by a lot of screaming vocals. And this album has none of that, and that was for one thing, it was kind of an eye opener. I was like, oh, this is going to have more like the kind of higher pitched operatic, more power metal-y kind of style vocals. It definitely, one of the biggest influences on doom is Black Sabbath. And there are a lot of moments throughout this record that just reeked of Sabbath influence. And I had no problems with that whatsoever. It was one of those cases where with each successive track, I liked it more and more. There was a couple that I didn't care for. The track Pain, I really didn't enjoy, because it just kind of completely changes a few minutes in. And I love songs that change and vary in their form. That's naturally, as a prog metalhead, that's kind of something that I'm into. But I like it if it's done really, really kind of smartly. I hate to sound kind of like this supremacist, the music I listen to is smarter than the stuff you listen to, but there wasn't a really clear logical transition. It feels like the song was really grooving for the first 2 or 3 minutes, then it just kind of stopped and went to this slow acoustic guitar thing, and it just kind of droned on a bit, and I lost interest. I listened to the whole thing, but then like I said, there were a bunch of tracks that I really, really enjoyed. There were a lot of moments, and this is something that I was hoping I would get, but I wasn't sure I would get, to kind of spit out some music theory terms. There's a lot of use of what's called the Phrygian scale, which is basically a scale that's one of the only kind of scales. It's kind of rare. It's one of the only scales that starts with only a half step. So you don't go as far from the first step to the second step, in other words. And there were a lot of moments like that. Basically, anything that's in this Phrygian mode is really, really dark sounding, and it makes it sound really, really kind of angry and hurtful. And I think that's a big part of what doom is going for, with this kind of the first song is called Falling. There's a song called Pain, the 8th day of mourning, the 9th day of awakening. There's all these kind of dark themes around the content. Of course, I didn't pay much attention to the lyrics. Actually, I can't remember a single lyric that was sang, because I only listened to it one time just to get a first impression, and then I figured we'd get in and kind of talk about it a little bit. I will probably listen to it again, as well as other stuff by this band, because I really liked the sound I heard. I liked the overall tonal harmonic language of the writing. I liked a lot of the riffs were really heavy feeling, and they weren't over in your face crazy trying to be heavy. They were just heavy, which I think is a really hard balance to strike in a lot of metal. So that part of it I really enjoyed. Like I said, most of the songs on it were really good, ooh, I get those moments where I really, really I like this and I want to hear this again. A lot of those Phrygian riffs were really, really cool. I forget what song it was in particular that really heavily uses the Phrygian scale for a lot of its bits. It's one of the first songs on the record. I don't remember what it's called. What else? Yeah, a lot of the vocals were great. There's a lot of these really kind of open sounding vocals, because they're harmonized with fifths. instead of with thirds, which are more melodically sound. It's kind of more of like a kind of static sounding, like something you hear more like in Gregorian chant, which kind of gives it a little bit more of that antiquated kind of like, this is something very timeless and very mysterious, also further darkening the overall impression it creates. So I was really impressed, and it was really surprising to me to learn that Doom is not really so much characterized by a lot of the lower screaming kind of stuff, which for me, screaming is, I have a really particular taste with screaming vocals. Anyone, you know, anyone who's like been following this along, we talked a little bit a couple weeks ago about nu metal, bands like Slipknot that have a lot of screaming vocals. And in that episode, I openly confessed that, like, when I was a kid growing up, I really didn't like screaming at all. It was like not my thing. And it took me a long time to like get into it. But even now I have a kind of particular taste. You know, like certain styles of screaming I enjoy more than others. It's why I like a lot of the kind of darker gent stuff, because the screaming there is like really, really raw and aggressive and guttural. You know, recently we did a black metal episode, and to be perfectly honest, I was never really a big fan of the style of screaming used in black metal. This is probably going to be a real hot take, but I've always found it to sound kind of weak. You know, like they're trying to sound angrier and scarier than they really are, where it doesn't really have that same gut punch that I get from screaming in other genres of metal. So I was like, oh, I'm going to expect a lot of screaming, and I'm not sure I'm going to like that, because the screaming is either going to deliver really well and I'm going to like it, or it's just going to fall flat and I'm going to be like, Doom is kind of a whatever thing. But there wasn't any screaming at all, and it was a really interesting surprise. And I'm looking forward to hear, you know, what the rest of Solitude Aeternus has to offer, because there was a whole list of albums that all looked pretty cool. I'm pretty visual, so artwork is pretty important, you know. I really like all the Ailstorm stuff, because there's this really cool like skeleton pirate mascot that's on all the albums. It gave me a little bit of like Eddie vibes with Iron Maiden, and I love the imagery that a lot of those bands project. And from the couple of glances I took at Solitude Aeternus's discography, it looks like some pretty cool stuff that I think is going to suck me in. So I'm going to definitely check out other stuff, and definitely ask Jeff and ask other metalheads out there. I might make a post maybe on the Facebook group, you know, some of you out there that are really into Doom, you know, give me some other suggestions, because I'm open to trying anything. Even if I don't like it, I'll probably listen to the whole thing anyway, just to give it a fair listen. So yeah, I liked it. It was cool. And I'm looking forward to hearing more and discovering more of what's out there. So
I'm glad you liked it. I wasn't sure if you were going to. Now, you were talking about, you know, screaming and growling and this and that. The subgenre of Doom that I gave to you is usually called traditional Doom.
Okay.
In traditional Doom, vocalists are like the vocalist from Solitude Aeternus. His name is Robert Lowe. He's one of the best. He's one of the best in the genre, as far as I'm concerned.
He also sounded like a power metal singer, pretty consistent.
Yeah,
and I like that.
He has some
good.
power. He has some power behind his voice, and
pretty nice tone. For a great range.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. He's actually in a band called Tyrant now, which they're more of a power metal band. He did a brief stint with the band Candlemass, which is another Doom band, which they're like old school Doom. They've been around since the 80s. He did a brief stint with them for, I think, 3 or 4 albums. He's done a lot of stuff. They're actually from Texas, and which is strange, because they don't sound like they'd be a Texas band.
Yeah, they're not like a southern rock kind of trashy, glammy kind of thing, you know. As much as I love Pantera, they're clearly from Texas.
Yeah, right. I don't know if they're from the same area of Texas or not as Pantera, but I'll say that they are. Maybe they're not. I have no idea. But these guys are one of my favorite Doom bands. Most of their albums are fantastic, but that one that I gave you was my personal favorite Doom album, next to like Black Sabbath. Like that is like the top. That's the cream of the crop, man. That's like one of the best Doom albums in my opinion that's ever been made.
Yeah, I thought it was solid. Like I said, there was only that one track that I kind of didn't care for, but everything else I loved.
And that's weird, because I like Pain. I like that out. I like that track a lot. I can see where you're going though with the abrupt stop.
Yeah, I literally thought something went wrong with like my phone. I was like, did it like switch to like something else in my library, or like something happened with Spotify? Did like something get shuffled? Did I like shake my phone the wrong way and change bands entirely? It was kind of off-putting for me.
Well, the nice thing about that, I'm glad that you liked it. And the nice thing about doing this podcast is we get to We get to just kind of show off what we like to the other person who maybe, like, hey, Doom has never been popular. It's never been like when you were growing up, enjoying your Slipknots and your new metal. I was like, Soul to Eternus, why doesn't anyone like this stuff? Because it's not going to be a popular genre because
something we could all say as prog fans,
Yeah,
like,
really.
Like how many people that don't even know Kansas's stuff,
Exactly.
Yeah.
So like it's nice that we could at least show each other like, hey, listen to this, because like you said, you're open to anything, and so am I. The weirder the better, man. I got some other stuff I got for you next week that is going to be even more of a departure. But I think you'll dig it.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right, let's go to other stuff we've been listening to this week.
Yeah, let's start with our guest.
Yeah.
Russ, what have you been jamming to this week? What are your jams?
So it's kind of like a weird dichotomous thing. At the passing of Eddie Van Halen, I actually started taking a listen to Van Halen 1, 2 in 1984. Just because it's a band I never listened to much on my own. So I've been kind of working my way through that, just listening to it. And I mean, a lot of stuff I recognize, I just didn't know it as well as I would have had I known the albums at an earlier point. The other side of it is a completely different turn in the other direction, which is some more modern stuff, like more modern funk and jazz. One of the artists being Lewis Colt, who is one of my favorite newer artists. Listening to an album called Time, and a group that he's a part of called Knower, as well as other groups like Wolfpack, which is great as well. Part of that is due to a jazz ensemble that I teach, so them playing some of that. But at the same time, it's been a weird mix of the two between the weeks. So yeah, it's been some good stuff.
Yeah, it's just as true for me with the whole like messing around with different styles and stuff. So, of course, we were just talking a little bit before about Ailstorm. So I've been trying to like really methodically work my way through their whole discography, at least all the stuff that's available on Spotify. So I've gotten to the end of that. So I went through No Grave But the Sea. I went through Curse of the Crystal Coconut again, just to kind of refresh myself on, why I would have recommended something like that in the first place to somebody. Oh man, what else have I listened to? I feel like there's something else that I'm forgetting. Of course, I listened to the Doom Metal assignment I had. And honestly, aside from that, I'm going to do a little bit of a plug. I've been doing a little bit of writing. Those of you that follow me on other social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, I started doing a series of live streams over the past couple weeks with a project called Project Tungsten, which is a series of short like video game rock loops that I wrote for fun. So I wrote 2 new ones last week, so I've been listening to those more so to kind of proofread them and look for different things. So like one of my afternoon walks when I normally would be catching all kinds of new content and listening to stuff, I listened to those couple of tracks over and over to look for things to fix and change. Did a couple of streams this week of kind of working through some of the new content as well as hitting some of my old pieces. So I've been listening to a lot of my own stuff, as self-indulgent as that sounds, but it's more for like the greater aim of creating more in the future. So, I mean, aside from that, the Ailstorm stuff, my assignment, I think that pretty much covers all of what I've mainly been listening to. So that's me. What about you, Jeff?
I forgot to tell you that I did listen to that track that you sent me, and yeah, I can see it in a video game. That it was awesome. The one track you sent me last week, really cool stuff. I like. So
without telling you, give me what game you think it goes in.
Mega Man.
There we go. That was the goal. That was the idea. Anyone who knows me, as much as I love pirates, I'm a huge Mega Man fan. So, and
really? I didn't even know that. I haven't played Mega Man in a long time. And maybe
I am a Mega Man junkie. I just live and breathe the guy, and he's my favorite game series. And like all of the Project Tungsten music was originally made to be a style study of Mega Man music. Like, let me try and recreate stuff in that same exact style. If you liked it, Jeff, I'll send you some other ones from the previous project. Because Project Tungsten 1 is like a full start to finish. It's literally the entire soundtrack of a Mega Man game written by me. Anything from like, your password screen, like your little incidental bits, the little jingle, like when he gets a new weapon, like everything I wrote from scratch. And now I'm basically redoing that whole process with new material.
Was that supposed to be for like the original Mega Man or Mega Man X?
More so Mega Man X. Because it's a little darker in theme, but I mean, there is so many parallels musically between the X series and the classic series. And that's, I mean, we could, that could be another episode for another day. We could talk about,
we could talk about video game music. I would love to. Yeah,
which could be really interesting. So that's my plug. You know, if you're into that kind of stuff and you like what I write, I've had a lot of friends and followers, you know, kind of tuning into my Instagram streams, which has been really awesome and humbling to kind of have people like, oh yeah, I could hear this being like in a Smash Bros level or something. And, you know, like people giving me lots of great feedback and comments and people just kind of chewing it up and listening to it for what it is. And, you know, it's been fun and it's inspired me to continue to create. And I think that's been a really awesome part of this whole pandemic, being stuck at home for so long, is like, all right, let me just write some stuff and have fun and, you know, have a nice incentive to get my playing chops up and get better at guitar and, you know, kind of try some new things. And, you know, so I literally started Project Tungsten 2, the sequel. So
more power
more music coming out.
Yeah.
More music's on the way.
I didn't listen to much this week other than Ailstorm and one other album because I've been busy too. I actually had 2 TV shows I had to produce this week.
Let's do your plug. Tell us about that. What other shows we got that we could check out online?
Well, you could check out the show I do about wine, beer, and good food called Wine, Hops, and Road Stops. Been doing that for a couple of years. And I've been doing an oddball travel show called Off the Beaten Path, where I travel around the world. Travel around Pennsylvania, checking out odd things. I wish it was. Well, I did do one show in Vegas, so that's was
cool.
Fun.
Yeah.
But mainly it's just a tri-state area. But yeah, Off the Beaten Path has been around for over 10 years now, and I did a paranormal investigation episode. I interviewed ghost hunters, paranormal investigators. I interviewed a Bigfoot hunter and a tarot card reader. So I was working on all that this week, but I was listening to some music. I listened to Vintage Wine by the band Skyclad. They're a folk metal band. It came out in 1999. Vintage Wine spelled Whine. They do a lot of play on words. They're the guy who writes the lyrics for all these albums is a fantastic lyricist. I mean, he is up there with Neil Peart as far as I'm concerned. But they're a folk metal band. The album's called Vintage Wine. The title track is fantastic. The rest of the album's pretty good too. Lyrically, it's just a lot of fun. There's a lot of play on words and double entendres. And there's a great fiddle player. And they're very, very folk metal-y. So that's what I've been listening to. That's all I got. Like I said, I had to do a lot of television work this week to get 2 shows out. So not a lot of music, but I did also listen to Chemical Wedding today too by Bruce Dickinson.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we talked a little bit about that last week. Yeah, awesome album. Good. Very cool.
Good.
Great.
All right, my friend, wrap it up for us. I think we're done here.
Yeah, I think so too. So, you know, as always, those of you that have been following along, those of you that are in the group and actively posting and participating in a lot of conversation, thank you so much. Those of you that are watching the videos, you know, be sure to like, be sure to comment some of your favorite, in this case, your favorite progressive stuff. If you want to kind of chime in about any various folk metal, pirate metal, that kind of stuff, doom metal, if you have any other suggestions, you know, let us know in the comments. Let us know on the Facebook page. Subscribe. We have a lot of new members that are kind of coming in. So, you know, be sure to subscribe to the channel and get us out there. You know, we're looking to kind of really expand this and kind of outreach, you know, the whole greater community of, you know, kind of just getting people to try new things and explore lots of new music. So thank you so much for watching Rock Talk.